Should I listen to my body if it's telling me not to run? I was chatting with one of our runners the other day who expressed concern that she wasn't listening to her body when she was getting pain in her knee by continuing to run because she felt like her body was saying, I'm not ready for this. And she was sort of trying to kind of stick to the plan and keep going. And this felt not quite right. Like she wasn't listening to her body when it was trying to talk to her. And this led to quite an interesting discussion. And she's right that we do need to listen to our body. But the discussion that we had was more around like how to understand what our body is saying in order that we can listen to our body and move forward towards our actual goals of recovering from our injury. Now, runners are often told by well-intentioned medical professionals that, you shouldn't run if it hurts. If it hurts, don't do it. You should listen to your body. If you run and it hurts, it's not ready to run. And there's often this implication that, running through pain is going to cause more damage and make the situation worse. And for me, this is far too black and white. It is saying that the only interpretation of what the body is saying when we experience pain is that we should not be doing that thing. So if you have pain when you run, you should not run. If it hurts, don't do it. But that's not really what pain means. What pain is the body's way of saying, I am worried about this part of the body. So if you have pain in your knee, your nervous system is saying, I am worried about this part of the body. It's the same if you have pain in your shin. If the pain is more intense, it means the nervous system is more worried. It's more concerned about that part of the body. Pain is a threat detection system. It is a way for your body to keep itself safe, or for us to keep ourselves safe. And as I've talked about in previous episodes, we can compare this to fear. Fear is another experience that we have that is designed to help to protect us, to keep us safe. So pain and fear have a lot in common. So what I want to do now is try and explain how we can better listen to our body, better understand what it's saying by using an example of someone being fearful. And for this particular example, we're going to be using my wife, who is fearful of spiders. She does not like spiders. Now, she does not have like a diagnosed or extreme phobia of spiders by any means. And that's not really what I'm going to be talking about here, although we'll touch on it a little bit. But we are talking about just a fear of spiders to the extent that if there's a spider here in the basement where the treadmill is, she won't come in the basement. She'll leave the basement, or whatever room the spider is in, she will come and get me. I will then go in and get rid of the spider by putting a glass on it and sliding the little piece of paper under it and throwing it out the door. And once I've assured her that the spider is gone and is no longer in the house, that she will re-enter the room. And what this means is that she doesn't use the basement where the treadmill is, which means she doesn't really run much in the winter because it's freezing outside and the treadmill is in the basement and there might be spiders in the basement. Now, what we have here is a chain of stimulus, experience, of response. The stimulus is the little harmless house spider thing. I don't know what the real name is for those spiders, but the little ones that, they can't hurt you. The experience for my wife is high levels of fear and maybe anxiety. And the response is to leave the room and get away from it, right? Also, part of that response is to avoid rooms where there might be spiders, like the basement. So if we have this stimulus experience response, all mediated by the nervous system, the sensitivity of that system can be adjusted up and down by the nervous system. We can become more sensitive or less sensitive. And the sensitivity of that system can be helpful, in which case we would call it adaptive, or it can be unhelpful, in which case we would call it maladaptive. Helpful would be in the instance that the response that is created or that results from the stimulus is appropriate and helpful and leads to a flourishing, safe, and happy life, right? So in the case of spiders, the reason almost all humans are scared of spiders is because some spiders are very, very dangerous. I don't know spiders very well, but if you imagine like a big, horrible tarantula that's poisonous or something like that, is it redbacks in Australia? They're pretty big and scary. I think they could kill you too. But you could get some poisonous spiders that can really hurt you, or they can kill you. So spiders can be very dangerous, which is why we're kind of naturally quite afraid of them. Now, if there was a tarantula in the basement, right? So that'd be the stimulus, poisonous, deadly spider in the basement. The experience would be high levels of fear on the part of my wife and me and everybody else who's nearby. And the response would be to get out of that room and to not go in it until the spider has been removed by some sort of spider trained professional. Now, that would be appropriate in the case of a big, dangerous, poisonous spider that might kill you, but it's not appropriate when we're talking about a harmless, teeny tiny spider that is not any actual threat. So when my wife is experiencing high levels of fear related to the little teeny spider, such that her response is to leave the room, avoid the room, that is not helpful. That is making her life, in a small way, a bit worse because she can't use the treadmill in the basement, but also it's just a maladaptive response in that it's an overreaction to the actual stimulus. And that's because the perceived threat from the spider is wrong. It's too high. The actual threat posed by the spider is almost zero, but the perceived threat is quite high, which means that she's responding to the spider, getting away from it, as if it was a big threat, like a poisonous spider, but it's actually not. It's a teeny tiny harmless spider. So the chain there between response, experience, and between stimulus, response, and my little chain got me. The chain between stimulus, experience, and response is hypersensitive, and it's not appropriate, it's not helpful, and it's maladaptive. And believe it or not, we get the same thing when we talk about pain with running. So many times I'll hear, usually on a weekly basis, from a runner that they've had knee pain for an extended amount of time, or Achilles pain or something else, but usually knee pain, and it's been painful for 6, 12, or 24 months, but yet when they've had a scan, they've been told that the scans are relatively normal, the MRI looks good, the X-ray looks good, and there's no significant sign of damage or tissue trauma that would really explain the pain. And this is a more extreme example of what happens always when it comes to pain, is that we always have an element of sensitivity of the nervous system involved in how painful that experience is. So if we would take the parallel example of a runner who has knee pain when they run for more than 3 minutes, what could be happening here is that as they are putting mechanical stress on the knee, that's the stimulus through running, the experience that they're having is a significant amount of pain, right? And then the response is to run less, avoid running, because they're trying to protect that area. The problem is, and this happens all the time, very, very common, is that because they then take that response of running less or avoiding running altogether, they then have no stimulus to adapt to, so that the system, the nervous system, remains sensitized. And what's actually happening is an overreaction. The knee is too sensitive. It is creating an experience of pain in response to a very mild stimulus that is actually not causing any damage and is no real threat, just a couple of minutes of running. It's not a threat, same as the teeny tiny spider. But the experience, right, is a high level of pain, similar to the experience of my wife with the teeny tiny spider, high level of fear. And the response is to avoid that activity, right? Don't run, because you have to listen to your body and you don't want to damage your knees because you're running through pain. Same as with my wife. Response is avoid the situation where the spider might be. Now, in both scenarios, we can use something called graded exposure to get the nervous system to adjust its sensitivity into a more appropriate and adaptive sensitivity or level. So if we take the case of my wife with the spiders, if she wanted to, she could use graded exposure. And they use this with, people with real phobias, this approach of graded exposure. They use it a lot in chronic pain. People who have chronic back pain or knee pain, that kind of thing. They also use it with allergies, which is an immune response that is in excess of what is appropriate and maladaptive and actually can be fatal, right? So this is another extreme example of the immunoneurological system in that case being hypersensitive. But to keep it simple, for our pain example and our fear example, we have our nervous system. It's being too sensitive to the stimulus that it's experiencing. So if my wife wanted to reduce the sensitivity of that system, because she's looked at the situation and said, you know what, I am fearful of that spider, of those spiders, but I can see logically that they're not dangerous, right? So what I want is a more appropriate response, but I have to get this fear to come down. So how am I going to do it? And the answer is graded exposure. So next time she finds a spider, rather than leaving the room, she might stay in the room and just kind of keep it on the far side, right? So she's far away from it. There's nowhere near it. So she's not experiencing too much fear or anxiety because she can see it. It's far away from her. She's in control, right? Gets me. I get the glass. I get a little, piece of paper, throw the spider out. Spider's gone, right? She goes to sleep that night, nervous system adjusts, and it says, okay, there was a little teeny tiny spider, right? And I was very scared because I was worried about what might happen, but nothing happened. I didn't get bit. I didn't get poisoned. I didn't die. So I'm just going to adjust my sensitivity down a little bit. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I'm still scared. And then she does that again. Like, let's say she does it 5 to 10 times. She stays in the room while I get rid of the spider. Then what she notices is she's not quite so scared. Even though she's still sitting on the other side of the room, the fear has come down. And at that point, if she wants to, she can do something to increase the exposure in a graded way. Again, she doesn't come right up and get the spider out herself, but she might come and sit next to me as I get rid of the spider rather than on the other side of the room. Does that for the next 5 or 10 times. And then if she notices she's not so scared when that's happening, then she can start actually, getting the glass and the little piece of paper and getting the spider in the glass herself and throwing it out. And then if she was really flamboyant and really wanted to sort of conquer her fears, at some point she might just pick it up in her hands, right? The way some people do, because spiders, these little teeny house spiders that we're talking about are actually no threat. And there is no need to be scared of it. So it's all in that hypersensitivity. So if she can dampen that down through graded exposure to a more appropriate level, then she'll not experience pain. She'll be able to pick up the spider and throw it out the door if she wants to. Now, it's the same with the running. Presuming that the running that you're doing, like 2 or 3 minutes of running on a knee that seems to be otherwise healthy, is not actually causing it any damage, we can use that same approach of graded exposure to get the nervous system to quieten down, to dampen down that sensitivity a bit. So the process is the same, graded exposure. Okay, it hurts when I run for 3 minutes. I'm going to run for 30 seconds. I'm going to take a rest for a minute. I'm going to repeat 10 times. And that's what I'm going to do the first day. And then I'm going to see how it feels. As long as my symptoms, the pain is in the green or orange of the traffic lights, right? So green is very mild, doesn't hurt afterwards, totally fine. Keep going. You can do more. Orange is like, yeah, I can feel it a little bit, but, it's not too bad. It's very, it's under control. It's stable. It's not super bad. And the next day it feels fine and I can get back to normal. Okay, that's orange. Proceed with caution. Don't add any more just yet, but you're good where you are. And red is like, it hurts. It hurt during, it hurt afterwards. It was getting worse. And, it was worse the next day. It was making me limp. All of this kind of stuff. That's red, that's too much, you did too much, you need to adjust the grading of the exposure down. So depending on what the traffic lights say, we can increase or decrease the exposure in order to get the appropriate level of stimulus, which the nervous system can actually adapt to. So then, you do that for 5 or 10 times, and then you notice the knee doesn't hurt so much running for 30 seconds times 10, then you can increase it to 1 minute times 10. You do that for 5 to 10 times, you notice it's less painful when you do 1 minute times 10 now. So you go up to 90 seconds times 10 and so on and so forth. The actual rate of progression I've talked about in other episodes, we can increase it or decrease it. That really depends on how your body is responding, how that sensitivity, how quickly it's changing and reducing, which will be a little bit different for everybody. But the idea is basically the same. You expose the knee to a stimulus that it doesn't like, or it is reacting in an inappropriate, hypersensitized way. You expose it to that stimulus. When you go to bed that night, the nervous system's going to kind of look around and be like, oh yeah, I didn't damage my knee, running for 30 seconds on it. It's fine. Okay, maybe I'm being a little bit sensitive. Maybe I'm being a little bit too worried about that knee and perceiving more of a threat than is actually there. So I'll reduce my sensitivity. Okay, the nervous system sensitivity reduces after a few exposures as long as they're appropriate, graded with traffic lights. Then you can add more, rinse and repeat until you're running as much as you want and the knee is tolerating that. So this is the concept of graded exposure. And like I say, you can use it with running injuries, you can use it with chronic pain, people use it with phobias and things that they're scared of, you can use it with allergies, all these other stuff, it's not really my wheelhouse, but when it comes to pain, as long as you're using the traffic lights, then you're good, which is one of a couple of important points I want to make, is that you have to make sure it's graded in terms of the intensity. Use the traffic lights is a good one, right? Which I use all the time. And the reason that we have to do that is because if we make the exposure to the stimulus too intense, we're actually going to make the problem worse. In the example of my wife, if she actually, I have a really good example of this. So when in Canada, I forget the name of the river. I think it's the Rideau River, or maybe the Ottawa River. There's this place called the Thousand Islands where there's lots of these teeny tiny islands that you can walk across in like 1 minute, and lots of them have little cabins on. And I wanted to propose to my wife. Well, she was my girlfriend at the time, I suppose. I found one of these little islands on Airbnb, and I planned this lovely romantic weekend away where I was going to propose on this teeny little island with the sun going down, and it would be just us in a cabin, and it would be peaceful, and I knew she would love it. And she would have, had there not been hundreds of thousands of spiders on this tiny little island, which is something that happens like a couple of months each year, which I didn't know about. And yeah, that really, really traumatized her. It was not good for her at all. And because the grading of the exposure was way in excess of what she was ready for, it actually made her fear of spiders worse because it was inappropriately graded. And essentially what her nervous system did was say, whoa, this idiot's like around loads of spiders now, even though I'm telling her to be afraid of them, I'm going to make the fear worse. And it's the same with pain. So if you had someone who had pain with running after 1 minute and you get them to just kind of run through it and run for half an hour, it's going to get really, really painful for the next couple of days. And that's because the nervous system is going to look at that and say, hey, I told this guy I was worried about running for a minute and he ignored me and ran for 30 minutes. I'm going to make that pain worse so that he stops doing that thing. He has to listen to me. So we have to negotiate with the nervous system and meet it where it's at through graded exposure. We can't just run through the pain. We can't just like throw someone into a room full, an island full of spiders if they're scared of spiders. We can't just, if you're talking about a phobia or an allergen, you can't start with a high amount of it. Like if someone's scared of heights, you can't get them to go skydiving and think it'll just like solve it. It's got to be done in a graded way, right? That's appropriate. And that's where the traffic lights come in. And that's why that's really important. And then the second part is that the person who has the problem, so my wife in this case with the spiders, or our clients with like knee pain with running, they have to have control. And the reason that's important is if they don't have control, so if my wife was going to be forced to be in the same room as the spider, or to be in the room for longer than she wanted to, or to be closer to it than she wanted to, what's going to happen is her fear and anxiety is going to increase. And that's actually going to further reinforce that pattern. It's going to further sensitize her system. And it's the same with pain. So we don't want to have a plan where we say, okay, this is the run I'm going to do. And even if it hurts, I'm going to keep going. I have no choice. Because then you're going to worry, oh, what if that's too much? You have to have an off ramp. You have to be able to say, okay, if it's going from green pain to orange pain, and then it feels like it might go into red, I'm going to stop. You have to have control. You also have to have say in how fast you progress. That's why we always, when we're working on this with our clients, there's always a dialogue back and forth about how quickly they feel like they can be progressed based on what they're experiencing. Part of that is to make sure that we plan appropriately, but part of that is to give them some control over the exposure, some control over the graded exposure, because that's going to reduce their fear, it's going to reduce their worry and apprehension, which is going to reduce the sensitivity of the nervous system and make the whole thing easier. And finally, we have damage. So you might have been listening to this and say, yeah, well, this is fine for someone who had an MRI of their knee and there was nothing on it and the knee looked fine. But what about me? I've got a meniscus tear, I've got arthritis, I've got patellar tendinopathy, I've got a cartilage defect. I've got all these things. I've got bone on bone, right? Yeah, don't get me started on that one. But the idea here is that we can use the same approach because whenever we have pain, there is an element of sensitization. And that element of sensitization from the nervous system can be dialed up or it can be dialed down. And generally speaking, we want to dial it down because we then want to work on making the tissue in question, let's say it's the joint, right? If it's arthritis in the knee, we want to make that tissue more resilient, stronger. One of the ways we can do that is by putting impact forces like running through the structure, because that's going to encourage it to become stronger and more resilient. We've talked a lot about that on this show in the past. But in order to do that, we need it to be a bit less painful, which involves dialing down the sensitivity, which is on top of it. So both things can be treated at the same time through this method of graded exposure. but you'll see improvements in pain quicker through reductions in sensitivity. So if you start doing something like graded exposure and your knee pain is getting better within a couple of weeks, most of that is because the sensitivity of the nervous system has been adjusted down rather than the resilience of the structures, the joint surfaces, the bones, the ligaments, the tendons, the muscles. Those things take longer to adapt and they are slower. So they'll tend to take weeks into months to adapt, whereas the nervous system can actually change quite quickly in terms of its sensitivity levels. Think, days into weeks. And graded exposure is a really important and helpful concept and phenomenon and treatment approach that you can use to help resolve your own or recover from your own running injuries, and definitely should include it because it's extremely useful. And you can and should do this on your own to help you recover from your injuries. But if you do want a team of experts to help you, who can help you plan it out in a way that it's more likely to work and to help you progress it at the appropriate rate, it's going to be easier if you have a team who does this all day, every day, and this is all they do. We've done it for hundreds of runners. So if you would like our help with that, then definitely, as usual, click the link in the description, book a call. We'll have a chat about specifically where you're at and how we might use this as one of the tools to get you back to pain-free running.